when the Supreme Court had a case brought to them in which they would decide whether or not drag is legally protected under the First Amendment, I was pretty sure their response would be to say, no, it is not protected. Instead, they surprised me. They actually went with the second worst response, which is to simply say, nope, it's up to the states whether or not drag will be banned. Effectively, by refusing to hear this case, they have essentially said it that it is up to the states. Let's read this article. The Supreme Court has again refused to intervene in a drag show controversy. The Supreme Court on Friday declined to get involved in a First Amendment challenge to a drag show ban. It was the second time the court has refused to step into a drag controversy this term. Students at West Texas A&M University went to the High Court after two lower courts refused to act in time to save a student's drag show scheduled on campus for March 22nd. They asked for emergency intervention, claiming a clear violation of their rights to free speech. This is, of course, the fact that it's already banned in Texas, and so they literally went to the Supreme Court, tried to get the Supreme Court to protect their First Amendment rights, and the Supreme Court has essentially declined. Now, this does not mean that the Supreme Court is refusing to take a position on this issue. That would be an almost good thing. What this actually means is the Supreme Court knows that when it's being challenged as a First Amendment issue, they can't do anything about it. They can't go against drag when it is being framed as a issue of free speech and, presentation. However, they can just refuse to hear it and let the state do what it's already been doing and just not come to a conclusion, one that isn't necessarily in favor of drag or against the First Amendment. So they're having their cake and eating it too by simply refusing to see the case. Last November, the Supreme Court also refused to intervene when the state of Florida asked it to temporarily reinstate its anti-drag show law. At that time, Justice Clarence Thomas, Samuel Alito, and Neil Gorsuch dissented. This time, there were no noted dissents. The student group will likely have to move its show off campus this year while it waits for a hearing from the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals, widely viewed as the most conservative federal court of appeals in the country. University President Walter Wendler first blocked the LGBTQ+ student organization from using a campus performance hall to host a drag show last March. In an email to the student body explaining his decision, Wendler called drag contrary to the basis of natural law, as well as derisive, divisive, and demoralizing. He said that the ideology underlying drag shows is demeaning to women and could not be condoned by the university. So not only do they call it degenerate and evil under that conservative bent, but they also drop that sort of turf view of it's demoralizing towards women. You're doing woman face. Wendler seemed to understand that denying public university resources to a group based on the content of the performance violated the law, writing that he would not allow the drag show to go forward on campus, quote, even when the law of the land appears to require it. But when the students went to court, they ran into District Court Judge Matthew Kacsmaryk. Before his judicial appointment by former President Donald Trump, Kacsmaryk publicly opposed including protection for LGBT individuals in anti-discrimination laws and called homosexuality disordered in an op-ed. So this is a Trump-appointed judge who is very anti-gay that they had to go through even before they got to the Supreme Court. Kacsmaryk, it's a Polish name, I swear to God, denied the students' request for emergency relief, and the group had to move their 2023 show off campus. After allowing time for briefing in the case, Kacsmaryk again ruled against the students 6 months later. He said drag, quote, does not obviously convey or communicate a discernible, protectable message. That's not how the First Amendment works, bro. A message doesn't need a reason to be protected for it to be protected by the First Amendment. That's kind of the point of the First Amendment. So it does not qualify for First Amendment protection. That is not how the First Amendment works, but okay, bro. A different Texas District Court judge ruled last September that a statewide law restricting drag shows was, quote, an unconstitutional restriction on speech. Texas argued that the law is, quote, not indisputably on the student's side, claiming drag shows are not inherently expressive, so they do not merit an automatic First Amendment protection. Are you kidding me? Drag shows are not inherently expressive, so they do not merit automatic First Amendment protection. That is the most bullshit legal jargon I have ever heard for explaining how a non-harmful art display, basically, is not worthy of protection by the First Amendment. This is literally just them admitting they do not believe in the First Amendment. They literally believe in the First Amendment for me, but not for thee. They're just outright admitting it. Lawyers for the student group caustically responded with a question. How could drag convey all of the horrible messages University President Wendler described if it didn't express any message at all? That question, at least for now, will not be debated in the Supreme Court. Of course, that's the whole point, because if it ends up in front of the Supreme Court, they either have to go against the First Amendment, or they have to side in favor of protecting drag. It is easier just not to see the case at all, right? So that is their having their cake and eating it too solution. Just the state of Texas outright saying that simultaneously drag stands for something they're against, but also stands for nothing and thus cannot be protected by the First Amendment. As if there is anything within the First Amendment whatsoever that specifies that speech must have a reason to be protected by the First Amendment for it to be protected by the First Amendment. That is not how the First Amendment works. The First Amendment applies by default, and it is the prerogative of a third party to argue why the First Amendment does not apply to certain speech. And it cannot be because it does not qualify, because it by default qualifies. There has to be extraneous factors that are on top of that you have to argue, such as this is speech calling for others to be harmed. You know, that would be a good argument, but it's not. It's a drag show. No one's getting hurt. It's fine. It's fun. Once again, this is the doublethink concept that fascists fall into, like the idea that the Nazis followed, that the Jews were simultaneously weak and easy to destroy, while also being an overwhelmingly dangerous and unstoppable force that has to be risen up against. Both of these things cannot be true in the real world, and yet in the world of Nazi propaganda, or in this case just generalist conservative propaganda, the enemy is simultaneously weak, pathetic, and worth laughing at. They're laughing stocks, and we're constantly winning. But at the same time, they are a sickness, a virus that is taking over, that has won, that is destroying everything you love, and you have to rise up and stop it. And if you are complacent, then they'll win. It's one of the fundamental core tenets of fascist ideology. Now, right now, this isn't the worst news that we could possibly have, but if Trump gets reelected and we have essentially majority control by insane far-right Republicans of our government, I can see a scenario in which the Supreme Court just openly rules against the First Amendment and acts as protections for drag in public as a First Amendment protected thing. It's already been done in Texas. Who's to say they won't just do it federally if they have that much federal control? It's really scary stuff, people. You need to vote. Not just for the president, but on a local level, too. You need to vote in your local elections. Vote, vote, vote. Freaking vote. And on top of that, if you haven't already, volunteer with Progressive Victory. Link down below in the description, and you can do !PV in chat. You can canvass with them, phone bank with them. You can do everything possible with them to try and keep Republicans out of office and keep them from taking your rights away.